My guest this week is Cheryl Pawelski. Cheryl is a 3-time Grammy Award-winning producer who specializes in historical reissues and box sets. She's worked at Capitol Records, Concord Music Group, Rhino Records, and in 2010, she co-founded the independent catalog label Omnivore Recordings, which is still going strong today. While working at Concord, she started the project that became this year's Written in Their Soul, the Stax Songwriter Demos box set that got rave reviews everywhere and was featured in The New Yorker. Also while at Concord, she worked with her friends Morgan Neville and Robert Gordon on the Stax Records documentary, Respect Yourself, the Stax Records Story. And it is my extreme pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Cheryl Pawelski. Hi.
Hi, Chris.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm holding in my hands right here.
Ooh, pretty.
Yes.
Oh, wait, nobody can see it.
Well, no, I'll take a little still. I'll put it up. Or you just rub your eyes really hard and you can see it. Or just buy the damn thing.
Yeah, I
Yes.
I highly recommend the latter.
Written in Their Soul, the Stax Songwriter Demo, 7 CD set.
Yeah.
How in the hell did you do this? Where did it start? And what was your process?
Well, it started when I was at Concord. When I got there, it was just about to be the Stax 50th anniversary year. And because Stax was so beloved a label, I was looking for other kinds of projects to do. Things that would, there was the obligatory, here's the Stax Records hits,
Sure.
the sort of best of Stax, and that we did a double CD that was great. It was I think it was the first collection that joined the part of the catalog that belongs to Warner Music Group now because of the Atlantic thing.
Is Concord they own Stax, or what's Concord?
Stax owns the post-May 1968 Stax Records. Atlantic got the pre-May 1968 Stax Records because of the and we'll talk about this in relation to the movie
Contract.
The
Yes.
distribution contract.
Okay.
So when they were parting ways, the poor people at Stax were shocked to go and read the fine print, which basically said, oh, Atlantic owns your entire record company now, everything that came before. So the 50th anniversary project that we did joined those two parts of the catalog for, first ever true best of. But I was looking for projects that would tell different parts of the Stax story that maybe hadn't been investigated as much. And so a lot of stuff had come out already, though, because, this was 2005, 6. And, we were well into the reissue and box set era. So a lot of things had already been done. But I did find a demo for 6345789. And it was just it's the one that you hear on the box set now. It's this raw thing of just, Steve Cropper and Eddie Floyd singing it. And it was just like, wow, I wonder if there's more of this, because this is compelling, right?
Right.
And it got me thinking about the songwriters. And at Fantasy, there were stacks and stacks and stacks of tapes in the tape vault, like there used to be everywhere, that were accessible to people who worked at the label.
Okay.
And so I would walk up and down the stacks, STACKS, of tapes, and I would see things like Homer Banks 1-inch 8-track demos, just a row of them. And I really wanted to hear everything that was on those reels, but I had a limited amount of time to pull together projects for the 50th. And I didn't think, I knew that Concord wasn't going to let me go on some fishing expedition and spend thousands of dollars rolling off tape that might not amount to a project. So I went to the publisher that owned East Memphis Music, which was most of the Stax songwriters were published by East Memphis Music, and it was owned by my friends at Rondor. So I went over there and I said, hey, hey, and they had put out this promo sampler, and it had another demo on it. I think it was Frederick Knight or Sam Dees or somebody like that. And I was like, you guys probably have some stuff that I want to hear. And they were like, yeah, we do. But here's the thing. Sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, we took all the original tapes and acetates and whatnot, and we transferred them to DATs.
Right.
And, space saving measure, and they
Sure.
threw away the originals. Well, then the DATs started going bad. And so they took those and they laid those to drives with all the other stuff that they published, other demos, stuff that songs for Broadway shows that never happened.
Okay.
So there was all this stuff. So I went through a give or take about 1,390 and 120-minute DAT files
Oh my
that had
God.
somewhere along the way. Some of them had lost their indexing. A lot of them didn't have writer, performer, or song title names.
Right.
So I just pulled out things that I thought were demos from the original Stax era. Sorry to be so windy about that, but
No, this
it's a,
is
it's a
fascinating.
process.
So you get all this stuff together. How
Yeah.
are you finding the time to even listen to all this?
Yeah, I left Concord after about, by 2007, I was at Rhino already.
Okay.
But the thing is, as I started going through those files, I kept finding stuff that was really interesting. And the demos themselves, I love hearing demos because I really believe a lot of times they're the very essence of the song, right? That, the productions in the studio, either by the writer or some other artist, sometimes the production gets in the way of the song,
Right.
and so, and I had learned this kind of early on in my career at Capitol, working on some very specific projects that were Beach Boys and the band related. And I was hearing demos that Brian Wilson and Robbie Robertson wrote, that those guys sang, and it was really getting that close to the essence of the song was fascinating to me. And so the Stax stuff even more, because what started to emerge were these sort of hero songwriter figures that nobody had talked about,
Right.
right? Like, Homer Banks, and he can sing the paint off the walls.
Uh-huh.
That guy has amazing voice. I'm like, why didn't they sign him as an artist? So anyway, because the material I was finding was so compelling, anytime I had some free time, I would just, I was working, at Rhino, and then I started at Omnivore and whatever. This was just kind of a pet project, and I didn't know if it was ever going to lead anywhere or not.
Did your ears know what was rare in a demo? Because some of this stuff was just like kind of jammed in the middle of stuff that had been put out, correct?
Yeah, well, there was that, and then there were the other songwriters that they published. There were demos by other people, like Omnivore released the White Light demos by Gene Clark. I had found those during this process
Oh, wow.
because, yeah. So I found, like, as I was going through this material to try to pull out the original Stax stuff, one day I'm sitting there and I'm like, this sounds like Gene Clark, and then there was this whole grouping of songs, and it was so cool because I'm like, this is like the White Light record, but it's just all of his solo demos. So
Incredible.
yeah, I went back to Rondor and I'm like, is this Gene Clark? This is absolutely Gene Clark. And they're like, yeah, it's Gene Clark. And I said,
Wow.
can we release this? And they said, well, clear it with the estate and with Universal, because he was signed to A&M at the time. So, to answer your question, Stax Records themselves have a sound because it was the sound of Stax. It was that room, right?
Yes.
And it was those studios. And so, I pulled out precisely by the end of it all, I had 665 tracks that I thought were original Stax demos. And then I just went about trying to identify them. So, I think eventually through sort of the process of filtering things out, it's not like something isn't an original one, that at least of the material that came out.
Did you have to get like a collective of musicians and writers together to help figure out, oh, I remember this and we did this, and
Yeah.
no, you're wrong, and was that must have been part of the journey?
Yeah, at the very end there were still some things that I couldn't identify. And so I went to Memphis, and my friend Robert Gordon, who's one of the producers of Respect Yourself, the film,
Yes.
And writer of liner notes with Miss Deanie Parker, who's also one of my co-producers. They're both co-producers on this box set. Miss Parker and got together William Bell, Bobby Manuel, Henderson Thigpen, and I think that was it, and Deanie, and we listened through the things that I couldn't identify, and it was great because Bobby Manuel,
Incredible.
yeah, he did all kinds of things with Isaac Hayes and Betty Crutcher, and he was amazing. He's just sort of like, oh, that was in B. And he could tell just by the way things sounded in there, and it was great because, they were there. I wasn't, and that's always the hardest thing in my job, is I'm kind of reconstructing things backwards blind because I wasn't there,
Yeah. But you're also we've talked at length about your origin story into this career and who you are. You live and breathe this stuff more than anyone I know. I can't think of anyone better to do something like this. And also those little things where you get to go to Memphis and be with the people and find out more.
Yeah.
It's got to be really satisfying for a music fanatic, if you don't mind me saying, like yourself, to get a complete picture and, help bring this to the world.
Well, this summer was, it kind of blew my mind because, when you do something for a living day in and day out, it becomes sort of normal. It's just your reality, right? But I sat on a panel on the day of release at Stax Museum with those same people, Miss Parker, William Bell, Henderson, and Bobby Manuel, and we added Eddie Floyd. And I'm sitting there between Bobby Manuel and Eddie Floyd.
Right.
And, I'm on this panel, like, I've got nothing, these are the people that were there. And it was amazing. One of the greatest things that ever happened to me in my entire career was Robert was moderating, and he asked the museum person manning the audio to play the Mac Rice demo for Respect Yourself. And it's pretty primitive sounding, and almost all of Mac's demos had this out of tune acoustic guitar. So he just starts rocking this thing. It almost sounds like a Talking Head song. And the audience in unison extemporaneously started singing the Staple Singers background vocals.
Oh my God!
To the Mac Rice demo. I must have looked like a complete fool. My mouth just hit the ground,
Yeah.
And it was amazing, and how much, do we share when something like that happens, right? It's just, it's just music is. It is literally the thing that we share the most as human beings outside of being human, I think.
Oh, yeah. Even watching this film that we're going to talk about, Respect Yourself, the Stax Records Story from 2007. I'm watching, and I've seen it many times, but I'm watching the title sequence of just still photographs of Isaac Hayes and Otis Redding and Steve Cropper. And my wife walks in and she's like, "You're crying already?" And I'm like, yeah, I just love it. I love music so much. I just like,
Oh my
I'm
God.
so excited about this. And I just had a quick aside. I did a very lo-fi version of what you did once for Robert Pollard of Guided by Voices. He's put
Oh
out
yeah.
three things called Suitcase, which are 100
Right.
songs each of songs that haven't been on anything else. So he had
Right.
just suitcases of cassettes lying around. And I would just stay up late at night because I was so excited. And I just was
Hmm.
finding things at the very end or different mixes
Yeah.
or live things of his band Anacrusis. Um,
Yeah.
and, it was so fun to just be like, what was this? Oh, that's,
Hmm.
just something that was supposed to be on Propeller, and we decided to cut it. Like, who's
Yeah.
singing that? Oh, that's Tobin. It was, it was a very low tech thing of what you did, but I loved the process of just knowing that there were going to be people out there that are going to flip their lid about these things
Yeah.
that even Robert Pollard didn't know if, I mean, he just couldn't keep up with what he had.
Yeah. And I've experienced that with other artists, and it's it's um it's really great that we're as far along in sort of recorded music history as we are, because people like us, it's really, I mean, it's not for everybody, right?
Right.
It's for the people that have like the big bug, we got bit early. And
Yes.
but things like this stack set, or the Yankee Hotel Foxtrot Wilco thing
Right.
that I was kind of doing simultaneous to it, you know being able to present these deep dives, uh and some alternate sort of views at this art is just, I'm just so grateful that I get to do it for a living. But it's nothing beats, at least for me, it's so gratifying when fans, because I am one,
Right.
respond to it in the way, because I think some of this stuff is mind-blowing when some of your favorite songs, 20 years later you get a different view on them.
Yes.
It's You've lived with this stuff, I mean, nothing's to me, you know s- yes, you can recite a poem or a piece of literature to yourself, or you can remember a painting or a piece of art, or a scene from a movie. But when you get a song, it's yours forever. You can sing it, it's becomes a, it just feels like it becomes a different part of you. So to super nerd out and get some other avenue of understanding of that song, that's what both the Stax thing and the Wilco thing were for me. And Stax was like a layer down. you know I was way deep down. Yeah.
Well, let's get into the movie. It
Yeah.
was made with your peers, Robert Gordon and Morgan
Mm,
Neville, directed film. And
yeah.
Robert Gordon has made so many amazing documentaries, Grammy Award nominations for Johnny Cash's America, Muddy Waters Can't Be Satisfied, this film, Respect Yourself, the Stax Records Story. And Morgan Neville directed the Mr. Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, 20 Feet from Stardom, Brian
Yep.
Wilson's A Beach Boys Tale. It's like, out of the gate, it's like the
Yeah.
best people to get on this project. And you were involved in this project too.
Yeah. I was trying to remember that far back. I think they came to me with it and pitched me on it. And because it was the 50th anniversary year and all that other stuff, I'm like, yeah, we really do need a good Stax documentary.
Yeah.
And Robert lives in Memphis, so he's right there. He's been steeped in it the whole time. And Morgan and I have been friends for quite a while. And I don't know if you've ever seen his documentary called The Cool School about mid-century
Yes.
artists. Yeah.
He did that as well.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's a great
Oh,
film.
it blew my mind. I love it so much. And so, he's become just both of them amazing storytellers, and whether it's audio box sets or in Robert's case, books. And
Yes.
Morgan is obviously focused on film. But it just felt like it was the right time with the right people for that project.
Yeah. Before this film came out, I had, like German documentary bootlegs,
Yeah.
where it was like I could get what I could get from it,
Hmm.
but no subtitles, or a bootleg of like the Stax Review show in
Right.
Europe when they're performing.
Yeah.
So having an official documentary with, Deanie and all these people talking about it,
Yeah.
and Al Bell, was really a missing piece, I think, for a lot of people. They get Samuel L. Jackson to narrate it, and
Yep.
he starts it off. It's such a great way to start it. He says, "It is an epic story. That which gave it life nearly killed it, more than once. Good and evil, light and dark, black and
Yeah.
white. In Memphis in the 60s, people who couldn't dine together got together to make music at a place called Stax." And you almost expect it to be like a Star Wars scroll,
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
read this. This is epic storytelling,
Yeah.
right then and there. I mean, it's just a great intro to what the highs and lows and the beauty and some of the drama of Stax.
Yeah. The appeal to me, once sort of becoming music aware, from being a little kid, right?
Yes.
It's like when you're a little kid, you're attracted to certain things, musically. Mine was like the first stuff that attracted me were like acoustic guitars, like singer-songwriter stuff. And a lot of the harder rock stuff and the R&B soul stuff, it just wasn't in my orbit, right? Like some of it was scary for a little kid, but as my ears grew up,
Right.
I gravitated so hard to Stax, and it took me a long time to understand why. But it's the Estelle Axton quote from the film. She said, "We never looked at color; we looked at people and talent." I think without knowing it, that sort of became primary for me in what I eventually came to do. The world is the world is pretty grim sometimes, and I wanted to wake up every day and work with talented people who were passionate about a collective thing, and that collective thing for me would be music. And to see it, I like, and that's the thing about the race stuff. I mean, obviously Stax is, you know uh an audio history of civil rights in the US in the second half of the 20th century, right?
Yes.
But for me, I wanted to be in that space. I wanted to be in a space where it didn't matter who you are, where you came from, anything that we subdivide ourselves by. If you are talented enough and awesome enough and open enough and passionate enough, let's be in that space. And I aspired to be all of those things.
Yeah.
And so Stax spoke to me in ways that I just didn't understand or couldn't define forever until um until I really started working with it. And
Yeah.
so this documentary was I learned a lot about myself through it too,
Mhm.
and maybe the best art does that, so I could not give this film a higher rating.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh man. And to see the people in 2007 you could still talk to Mac Rice,
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And, you know, Deanie, we're talking about Deanie Parker when we say Deanie.
Miss Parker,
Yeah. And she
yes.
was the Stax director of publicity. Correct. That was her
Yeah,
title.
I she started, I believe, at the Satellite Record Store.
Yeah. And I want to ask you about that too, because so Jim Stewart, who was a banker and a fiddle player, and his sister Estelle, who
Hmm.
was a former teacher, got together and they basically, mortgaged a house and pulled their money to rent this theater, the Capitol Theater, to record country music. And
Hmm.
then, people in the neighborhood started finding out about it, like Rufus and Carla Thomas,
Hmm.
and people were like, "Oh, I want to go in and record there." And Deanie Parker says, has a great quote in it: "When the Flowers started to play their music and show their creativity,
Yeah.
Jim said, 'I can get into this,' and Estelle said, 'Welcome.'" And so Estelle was
Yeah.
learning about music through her son, who was in the
Yeah.
Marquis.
Packy Axton.
Yeah, her son was in the Marquis, and so she was learning about this music through her son. But
Right.
she opened the record store next to the recording studio. Do you know
Yeah.
much about the satellite record store and the history of it and her impact?
She was doing sort of on the ground research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because kids would come in and she would encourage them to listen and to the records that were there, and she would make notes of what they liked. I mean, there you go. You're right there.
Ground zero.
And yeah, and it's interesting how much talent poured, and that's another thing. You know, up the street, Aretha Franklin was born up the street. You know, and so there are all these people in the neighborhood, and suddenly they're hanging out at Stax, and this music happens. I mean, how much it made me wonder, like, does every neighborhood have that amount of talent in it?
I don't know, but it is a common thread in most of these documentaries we're talking about.
Mm,
Time and place, and
right,
whether you're talking about a Welshman who's an experimental classical trained pianist meeting a surf doo-wop novelty writer, and you get John Cale and Lou Reed, and then they're like, let's get
right.
Mo Tucker in this, and and then you have the Velvet Underground.
Yeah,
Just, so many things are just about people passing through and often not knowing the people,
yeah,
like getting to know them through creation.
yeah.
But what was cool about this film is the song "'Cause I Love You" by Rufus Thomas and Carla Thomas.
Mm,
They cut to Booker T playing the riff on
mm,
the organ of the sax he played. And he was 15. And
mhm.
they were like, yeah, we knew he played sax, but he was like, I also can play piano and keyboards, And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, this teenager is just part of the thing. It was
Right.
like everyone kind of came from the neighborhood with a skill set.
Yeah,
But and then and Steve Cropper, and Donald Duck Dunn,
yeah.
having their band, and Al Jackson. It was like, yeah, they didn't have to go far to make this happen.
How nuts is it that all those people were there, though? You know?
The right people with
Yeah,
the right yeah. I like watching Al Jackson in this film. I'm not a drummer, but like I can never get enough of watching
right.
him play drums. And there's something he does in the '67 European tour where he hits the kick pedal like pum 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 pum. He stops, and then he shakes the singer's hand. They stop, shakes it, and then he goes "Brah," and plays the
Yeah,
end. But it was just like it was all staged. But it was
yeah.
like one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Well, that's the performance footage in this is
Yes.
like, if you ever want to step on a stage and you haven't seen the footage in this film, just don't do it. No, why would you do it? Right?
It's
I mean,
so true. Everything is just explosive
yeah,
and yeah, but just out of the gate, Stax kind of has some early success. Wayne Jackson says the first time I was in there to play on a track, I cut a #1 song, with the instrumental Last Night. And
right.
maybe that was common back then with labels. And it's also, I always forget, because Stax is just so large in the mythology of music, that they were an independent record label.
Yeah.
Like they keep saying that in this. We were a formidable independent label. And I'm just like, that blows my mind. Because to me, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, there was Capitol and there was Stax.
Columbia.
Columbia, exactly.
Sure.
It's just like Stax to me was in the conversation. Do you know how quickly their music started to kind of get around the nation?
Well, I mean, now we'll pick up the Atlantic part of that story, right? I mean, obviously the guys at Atlantic, and this was happening with little labels everywhere. You had some regional success, and then a bigger fish would come and say, "Oh, we'll distribute you and
Sure.
help you." So I think some of those early hits were greatly assisted by the uh Atlantic distribution mechanism, for sure. But it's not far from the late 50s to when you get Otis Redding, you know.
Right.
So that stuff happened pretty quick. So I think certainly, you know, Sam and Dave, Carla Thomas, Rufus Thomas, you know, the the 60s success was certainly bolstered by the Atlantic deal. So I think
Right.
it happened fairly quickly, you
And
know.
Al Bell came in during that time too, around the
Yeah.
Atlantic time. He was a DJ
Yeah.
on the East Coast and took over. What was his title at
I think he was
Stax at that point?
he was promotion, right?
I
He
think
was
so.
the
Yeah.
promotion guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of laughter when people talk about how great Al Bell was as a salesman. They're just like, things could be so dire, and he'd be on the phone and just selling
Yeah.
this
Uh, uh,
beautiful concept to people, and we would be laughing because we're like, well, we have no money, you know?
Have you ever had the good fortune to meet Mr. Bell?
I haven't.
That dude just drips charisma.
Oh, you can tell he's incredible.
Yeah, he's special, and I think you know, every label in the 60s and every manager in the 60s probably had to have that uh persuasive abilities, you know, those persuasive abilities where you're out there and you're selling a thing and you've got the greatest thing in the world. And it just turns out that Al Bell had one of the greatest things in the world. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
I don't know what it was like back then. I always like to say that, you know, the music business was founded by thieves and criminals, and I'm probably not far off, but, you know, I'm not sure how hard a sell you had to do with the that music that was so um present, you know,
right.
and sort of undeniable. I mean, Sam and Dave, right?
Yeah. Who also came down from Atlantic
Yeah.
and
Oh
down
yeah,
to Stax to record. And in the film, it's
right.
so great. They're crying. They're like, what is Atlantic doing to us? They don't love
Yeah.
us anymore. Our careers are done.
Yeah.
And they're just like, why are they sending us to Memphis to this thing? Because their career hadn't really jump started yet.
Right.
And then they were like, it was the greatest gift they could
Yeah,
have given us.
that's
And
right.
I do feel like Al Bell having the promotion and DJ thing was able, later when the Staple Singers comes to Stax, he knew them, they
Yeah.
knew him.
Yeah.
He has a great quote in it. Oh, it was Otis Redding and myself having an affair at the radio station. It was just us two. I just loved those records.
Oh my God. Yes.
So just having somebody who was already just a fan
Mm-hmm.
and was just ready to hit the ground running was
Mm-hmm.
really beneficial for Jim and Estelle as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
initially, who didn't have the business sense and kind of were just about keeping the doors open at that point.
Yeah, for sure.
In the film, they tell the great story about Otis Redding's trajectory through the doors of Stax. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I'm sure you've heard firsthand what that experience was like for people who were there that day.
You know, this is, we're talking about the magic of the neighborhood and sort of the happenstance of things, I guess. Um, it kind of blows my mind that he shows up one day, just shows up with it was Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers, right?
Yes.
So he's
The
unloading
famous
gear.
the famous band we all know and love.
There you go, the Pine Toppers, contenders. Um, but you know, he's unloading gear into the studio and begging to let to be able to sing for someone,
Yes.
right? As a, it's like me, I'm Otis, man, I can sing. Just wait, get me on the mic, you know. And
They're so dismissive.
I
They're
know,
like,
right?
hey, get this guy off my back. He's been here all day. Just
Yeah,
would you go listen to him? Like I'm
exactly.
too busy.
Yeah. And
Which
you know, but what I thought was interesting is not that they knew what they were hearing when they actually finally let him sing, but that you know, the point was made that Otis Redding would not have had a shot at Motown, but he had a shot at Stax because Stax had this open door policy in the neighborhood, right? Like Everybody else was coming in from the neighborhood and having hits, right? This
Yeah.
guy rolls up with the Pine Toppers, and they made this distinction between Motown and Stax. Like Motown was very much a controlled situation.
Right.
Stax had an open door policy, and I even found this in some of the demos when I was working on the box set. There was stuff that we couldn't identify, and we just kind of assumed that they were neighborhood auditions that Jim Stewart would have on Saturdays.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Amazing.
if you look at the box set, I think there's only one song that we couldn't wind up identifying. Nobody could. And Robert just suggested that it may have been drawn from one of those neighborhood auditions. So the thing is, Otis was coming with a group, right? So he already had a leg up, right? And he was already in the building, maybe not on a Saturday, but the fact that Otis Redding may have been shined on by all of the other labels, that's pretty telling about the magic of what was happening at Stax at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of discussion. Al Bell and Rufus Thomas talking about over here you had Motown, which
Hmm.
was, they painted as like the smooth assembly belt kind of thing. And
Yeah,
I love Motown too, but it's so funny to hear it
sure.
also just be like, but what we had was
Right.
like real and gritty.
Yeah.
And we, like when you hear Rufus Thomas just like
Yeah.
go on a tear about like we had this, and he just starts getting into like he just starts emoting and making sounds. It's just like,
Yeah.
all right, yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah. He said Motown had the sweet, Stax had the funk. And,
Yeah,
and for me, I'm like, yeah, I mean, who doesn't like Motown? But it also became one of those things for me. And this is, sort of as my ears graduated from maybe eighth grade to high school or something, right?
yeah, sure,
Um, you know, all those Motown songs were great, but I heard them all the time. You
true.
know, when I got into the funk that Mr. Thomas was talking about, I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, 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 this is for me.
No, I remember that film Barfly came out, and
Oh
they
yeah,
had it bookended with a Booker T and the MG song I was not aware of, and I just was like, this is the greatest song I've ever heard. Like in a movie theater, and they're just showing like
yeah,
neons of dive bars. I'm
yeah,
like, can the film just be this? I don't want to meet any characters. And I
right,
went out like and got that record immediately.
yeah,
Because it has a feel and a push to it that is completely different and so unique.
yeah, yeah. And what's interesting about the Lorraine, aside from the really impossibly sad and tragic obvious, is the some of the songwriters would go over there to write. um I think it was Bobby during our listening session. Mr. Manuel said he and Cropper and maybe Duck or something, he said they would go over there and write in the honeymoon suite.
Yeah, at
And
the Lorraine Motel. Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
cracked me up. So I mean, that's sort of neighborhood square. Nothing's quite far from each other there. There
Okay.
was a place that everybody go eat called the Four Way Grill. That's still there. And Ardent was close enough nearby, so if they had a lot of the spillover studio work. I know Staple Singers did sessions there, and I think Muscle Shoals too.
Can you put that in context next to Stax, what Ardent was in terms of what they were
Oh,
making?
I'm sorry. Yeah, Ardent Studios was a gentleman named John Fry started Ardent, and I think they had the same boards, if I'm not mistaken. But John was a studio aficionado from a very young age, and it's where all the big star stuff came out of.
Right.
So and this, yeah, put that in context, because over on Madison you had Big Star making their first records at Ardent, and over at Stax, on Macklemore you had the Staple Singers doing some of their
Right.
earliest Stax stuff. So I mean, And then, up the road at American, you had Elvis doing things, I mean,
It's
that's how,
crazy.
and then over at Royal, you had Al Green,
Uh,
right? I mean, all of this stuff was coming
yeah.
out of Memphis at the same time. Can you imagine that? I
No.
mean, I think about LA and all the sessions that happened running around LA, with everything from jingle sessions to soundtrack sessions to all these great records that came out of there, in the late 60s, mid to late 60s there too. And it's of course been my good fortune to have been based in LA for so long, and especially at Capitol, and run around to those studios. And that like, you get a whiff of those sorts of things and it's just like, oh, tell me more.
Yeah.
But the first time I landed in Memphis, I felt it coming up through the soles of my feet. I went, something happened here, and I want to know everything I can about it. So but yeah, so that's your context, especially late 60s, early 70s. I think it was 71 that John built on Madison. But he had another place on National before that. So I'm not sure if he had been doing spillover sessions from Stax when he was on National. That I don't know.
No, when you put in those terms, it's almost too much. Um,
Yeah.
and at 67 is also a really big turning point because the bands, I think it's like Eddie, Floyd, Sam and
Yeah.
Dave, Booker T, and the MGs, and Otis Redding, they go to Europe to play in 67 for the first time, and they realize they're treated like stars. Like, they're like, oh, we go to hotels and restaurants, and they treat us like we're stars.
Yeah.
And it was the first time where they were like, I think we can really make a go at this, like, financially.
Yeah.
And we are musicians, not, I think some of them, there's some, I think Wayne is talking about, we were having conversations about like, well, what are we going to do when this all ends? And after that trip, and also after
Right.
Monterey Pop, they're basically like,
Right.
we are established. It just changed their mindset. They were still like, it was like it was still in the neighborhood still. They hadn't realized how broadly they had influenced culture and
Yeah.
music yet. And just Otis Redding calling his wife and just being like, oh, I killed it tonight. They were mine. And she's like, right, I know it's really late. Like,
Yeah, I want to go back to bed, dude.
Yeah, it's true though.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah. I'm glad they got to experience that, because they should have been treated like stars.
Absolutely.
Right? They should have been treated like stars. They should have been treated like people. And yeah, and the performance footage in that segment of the film is just off the hook, because they're getting that vibe, right? They're like looking out at that audience and they're feeding off each other, and
they're in shock, Yeah. They're so happy.
They're playing, they're performing, they're right up there with it. The energy is great.
It's so great because it's like, the show builds. All right, it's Booker T and the MGs, killer. All right, now we're gonna have the horn section come out, killer. And now we're gonna have Eddie Floyd come out, knock on wood, killer. Now we're gonna have Sam and Dave come out, Soul Man, killer. And then it's just like, and here's, oh, by the way, here's Otis Redding. And whenever I watch that footage, I'm so mad at some of the people in the audience. I'm like, you don't know how lucky you were, because they're just like in a television audience watching this thing. And most of them are losing their mind. But of course, there's going to be a couple people in the theater who are sitting down, like, they're very, beatniky looking. They're enjoying it, but they're not feeling it. And I'm just like, oh.
Well, there's always the guy in the back like this.
Yes. Yeah, and so be it. Yes, and we're talking about him, but we're talking about his ghost right now. So, more power,
That's right.
Power to them. So,
I'm sure he grew up to be one of like the sort of mansplainers, right?
He invented mansplaining.
That's right.
And it's not long after that Otis Redding dies in the plane crash, and Stax loses their biggest star, because at this point Otis Redding was synonymous with Stax, and Stax was synonymous with Otis Redding. They were just, and that is also at the same time where Atlantic is telling them, you don't own what you think you own. And Jim had not read any of the fine print.
Right. So they lose everything they'd ever done up to that point.
Incredible.
They lose Otis Redding. Martin Luther King gets assassinated. And I don't you it's unbelievably tragic. But I love what they did after that. They basically said, we're going to have a soul explosion. That's what they called it.
Yeah, the finger snap.
Well, everything changed. And I love how defiant and committed and independent and competitive Al Bell was in the face of all of this, right?
It is incredible.
Yeah.
He's doing his own. He's going to like record conventions and setting up shop.
Yeah.
Like buying Stax.
Right.
Let's do this. And he said the finger snap symbol it's also signaled the change, which was so iconic. And I didn't know that came in so late.
Yeah. Well, before it was the falling records, right?
Yeah. And the songwriting starts changing. Who's Making Love is like their biggest hit. There's that great scene in it where Betty Crutcher is talking about people are coming to me and like, why did you write that song? It's that sexy song. I've got so paranoid about what's going on at my house now. Like, she's like, it's incredible. But they were having to rebuild the catalog, and they, I believe, recorded 28 albums at that time to flood the market.
They recorded a whole bunch of records, and basically the studios were running 24/7. All the songwriters were going bananas. Betty actually turns out to be one of the heroes of the Written in Their Soul box set. She only ever released one solo record on the Stax family of labels, but she was part of the We Three songwriting team, and she wrote tons of songs. And so I wish they would have recorded her more, but we have her demos at least. But all of that's the whole everything is everything, and it's Stax. It was just, I think they had to kind of reclaim and remake their label kind of overnight.
Yes.
And the fact that they did, and Isaac Hayes rose out of the ashes.
Yeah, he says completely accidentally. He's like, can I be one of the 28 records you're making? He's like, just give me a shot. And that's the album that catches on fire.
Yeah. Hot Buttered Soul rolls straight out of it.
And all of a sudden he goes from a songwriter straight up to their biggest artist.
And then along come the Staple Singers, right?
Yeah.
So you had that whole group of artists in the 60s that just get moved over to the Atlantic system. And obviously some are on both sides of the fence. I mean, Carla had records on both sides, I think. But in the second half of this, though, wow, here comes Isaac Hayes and the Staple Singers, and it's just as big as it always was.
But this is also the period where they're having to grow in an interesting way. They're starting to get people coming in and demanding to be paid off, like, give us $50,000 or we will kill you. And they have to hire, like protection for the label, build fences to protect, Al Bell and the musicians, and to stop that.
It's a damn shame. Yeah, no, it's just a shame. And, not to be Pollyanna and naive or anything, people are people. There are always going to be terrible things happening, right?
Sure.
But to have such a fine point put on it, that like before all of this sort of cascading bad stuff happened, it seemed like it was a pretty amazing artistic space. And afterwards, I mean, I don't know, to have security to protect a creative space, that just becomes the world that we experience now. And to me, that's just, Stax is the best of things, and it's just the worst of things. It makes me incredibly sad.
Yeah, and with that protection, they were, able to actually make some incredible stuff from it. Watt Stax arose out of, the same era,
Yeah.
and was a massive success. $1 tickets, which is incredible to go see,
Yeah.
the Barcades with that song "Son of Shaft." Still, I'm just like, if you don't know that it's called "The Son of Shaft," you're like, oh, Isaac Hayes. First, we're gonna get the Barcades playing. Oh, they're playing Shaft, but no, Son of Shaft.
That's right.
Okay, you get a pass. But the staple singers are incredible in that film. Rufus Thomas getting everyone to come out on the field and dance.
Well, just Rufus Thomas's shorts.
Oh my God, yeah, doing the funky chicken.
Do the funky chicken.
And Isaac Hayes getting his clothes peeled off him on stage. It's really. And I'm so glad that they decided to film that as well. But they're also starting to move into film. With Shaft winning Academy Awards, and but they're also starting to spend more than they're making at this point.
Well, it's a little bit of a testament to I think it's like business rule 101, like do what you know how to do only. Like I think when you start seeing, and I've actually been at record companies where I've seen this happen, because we're human beings and we never learn from history. That they're like, oh, well, we're so awesome at making records, we're going to get into movies or the book world, and they're different. They're different for a reason, and you will probably fail.
Yeah, they like, let's get a basketball team.
Exactly. It's just like, no, maybe not. Maybe make some more great records.
Right. But it was a chance to to create more in the world, and to be a force in the world, and all these areas where money could be made.
I understand.
The problem was that it just took the eye off the prize, which is the music.
Yeah, well, I understand the temptation, but again, business 101, man.
Well, I mean, it didn't work.
Right.
I mean, I can defend it all day long. But I think I can understand the allure and the thought process of being like, well, yeah, let's, we got to move into this. We, let's get, for Shaft, let's get a black director, a black leading man, black composer, and, black producer, and we'll make history. And they did.
And they did. And that is all laudable and excellent and short-lived, Yes. Unfortunately.
Is this the period where CBS Columbia is coming in to work with them as distributors for the latter part of their recording history?
That's correct. Yeah. My understanding, and I don't, it's deeper than I think the film has time to go into, but my understanding is that as they were sort of hemorrhaging, one of the problems was that the recorded music side was tied to the publishing side.
Okay.
And unfortunately, as the recorded music side was really tanking, the publishing side couldn't help it because it was all coming out of the same entity.
Oh, wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you're not able to release records properly, and remember there was like a hitch in the distribution.
Yeah.
So if you're not able to sell the records, then if your publishing is under the same roof, it's not making money off of records being sold. Right. So the publishing money wasn't flowing either. So it seems like the economic problems were compounding.
It was getting messy too. Estelle had already left and been bought out.
Right.
So it was Jim and Al Bell, and I think Bill Matthews came in as a president, laid into it, and he was kind of turning over stones and finding out all these problems. The FBI are starting to come in. The IRS are starting to come in. The bank is suing Stax and CBS. There's a U.S. grand jury with CBS and Paola and things like that. It's just really getting it's getting big.
It's yeah. There was some big trouble. there was all kinds of big trouble, and that's the thing. It was really compounding exponentially. But I don't think we should tell people how it ends, because I think that story ends in a positive way, because we're here still talking about it today.
Totally.
And we're still listening to new music from Stax today, and it is, last I checked, 2023. that is some pretty serious legacy business right there.
I'm going to do one spoiler alert. Estelle from Stax eventually goes on and produces Disco Duck. So there you go.
Did.
So you can take that as the spoiler you need. I think the film is beautifully done. A lot of complaints people have with music documentaries is talking heads in these films, or not full performances. But the great thing about the talking heads in it is everyone is super interesting.
Yeah.
There's a nugget in every little moment that every person who, whether they were a small part of the company or a large part, they all have an interesting scope on what was going on and an interesting thing that they're seeing out of the side of their eye or were completely invested in. And I think that this film does an amazing job juggling this is decades of storytelling. Yeah,
for me, it this is obviously a sweet spot for me, but it could have been 10 hours long and I still would have wanted more.
Yes.
But I get the talking heads thing in music documentaries. Too often we see the same ones, but not in this one. And what I feel like is especially valuable is having these people on record, because one of the unfortunate situations of my business, of my job, is that I lose people all the time. I lose my primary sources because they made their art oftentimes before I was out of diapers, and these people just they leave us, and with them they leave these stories, and that they go with them. And so I think that this is a really valuable historical piece.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of that.
Do you have a favorite, push come to shove, do you have a favorite Stax song that that you just sort of like, all right, I know I get the Staple Singers over here, got Otis Redding over here. It's like this film, I just asked an impossible question. I'm going to retract that because I had the same thing. I was like, I think this Booker T song might be the greatest song. And then you're like, no, it's Otis Redding. Then you're like, wait, no, it's Sam and Dave. No, it's Knock on Wood. It's definitely Knock on Wood. I can't do without Knock on Wood. No, just respect yourself. No. So I retract that. That was a very innocent thing for me to do. But if you had to pick a song to play today, what would you play?
Oh boy. Well, I'm in the mood for a song that nobody knew existed until this box set, called Everybody's Talking Love by Betty Crutcher, because Bobby Manuel at the end of that song shreds on guitar.
Incredible.
That guy, oh my God. No, the whole song, the song is awesome, and it's just I can't believe nobody ever cut that song.
I really enjoyed that the box set is kind of broken up with, disc 1 through 3 are Stax writers and Stax releases. Disc 4 is like moonlighting Stax writers and non-Stax releases, and disc 5 through 7 is uncut songs. I found that really helpful when I was listening to all this stuff to have context.
Yeah,
there's great essays in it, beautiful layout, great photography. I just think this is an essential thing. you don't need a special day to buy it. You should just get it
Go get it.
because it's going to make your life better.
So much better.
So is there a box set that in your wildest dreams you would love to see that might be impossible to...
Earlier we were talking about, we get to be part of sort of the reissue box set world because we kind of have an understanding about, we have context for these things, and our peers, peer artists have context for those things. Stuff that artists that came before us have a tendency, and I've just found this in my work, and it might not be true all the way across the board, but I find that those artists, the older artists, didn't grow up understanding that, like, something that wasn't perfect, that might be a demo or a song of yours, that you don't deem as perfect as the artist, that shouldn't be released, right? So there are some sets that it would be great to have, but like artists want to overdub or remix or try to make them better, like the songs or whatever. They want to perfect them.
Yeah, the Rolling Stones do that all the time, and it's frustrating.
It is. I've had that argument with people of their age group, with artists of their age group, and I'm like, no, I would like to hear, your original intent in 1971.
Yes.
Your original art. I don't want to hear 1971 artist as interpreted in 2023 with what you think sounds correct.
Yeah, you have a great paragraph in the box set about demos. It says, demo is often short for demolition, but here it means demonstration. Though some of these are so great they'll destroy you. And I'm like, that is...
Well, that's Robert Gordon, and that's what you're going to get in this film too.
Yes, it's so true though.
Yeah.
The thing where you just get to hear the genesis of things, the excitement, and the dream of what it could be it hasn't even been realized yet.
Right.
But it still has to be great for it to get even greater.
Right.
And I think that this box set shows is such a great showcase for just an amazing body of work.
17 or 18 years too late for the 50th anniversary of Stax, but it achieved my initial goal, which was telling a different story about Stax. I just couldn't get it done on time.
No, it's fantastic. At the end of every interview, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the movie. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many Stax finger snaps do you give this film? 1 Stax finger snap to 10 Stax finger snaps.
In its efficacy and expert nature of telling the story of Stax, I give it 9 finger snaps, but it misses 1 finger snaps for being too short.
Oh, 9 is the perfect answer. And you denied it 1 because you're right. This is something that deserves more. And this is a perfect way to tell this story. But maybe somewhere down the line, there'll be another opportunity to even dig deeper like you did with this box set. So
I sure hope so, because this is... Stax is a valuable story in every possible way. It's creativity, it's humanity, and everything that was good and bad and happy and sad about it is things that I hope we continue to learn from.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. It was so good to see you. I really appreciate this.
Super fun. Thank you for having me.
I'll see you at the show.
You will.
Bye.
All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday, so be sure to search for the show on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the show. And if you've enjoyed this, it would mean a lot to me if you would rate and review it as well. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie, and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!